It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Tim. He's the Master Shipwright. He is the person who has to put all the different kinds of evidence together and makes the ultimate decisions of what the ship looks like. He's not just building a ship to look nice, it's a ship that's got to go to sea. So it's a very responsible post, and we're very lucky to have him. He's been working in the international tell me what it's called again. The Lowestoft
college,
group.
The International Boat Building Training College.
International Boat Building Training College, and I've just met somebody who went to it up there, which is good. And has had a career in boats as long as anyone can remember, as long as he can remember anyway. So that's brilliant. So we are very lucky to have this man. He's got a tremendous grasp of how wood can be carpentered and the shape of ships and what they do on the water. So let me hand over to Tim, who's going to talk about how to build a Saxon ship, its challenges, its rewards, its historical rewards, its research, all the things that we hope to produce. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Very generous introduction. So, how do we reconstruct a Saxon ship? First of all, we need some evidence. This is one big experimental archaeology project. These are images of Basil Brown on the left here. I'm not quite sure who that gentleman is on the right, but that is the original excavation in 1939. And you can see just the scale of it from those people. The ship is 27 metres long. In my language, that's 88'6", I believe. And it's about 4 metres broad, 4.5 metres broad, 14 foot. And very early on, they realised that this was something special. And we got, I think this is W.F. Grimes excavating sections of the chain that held the cauldron and various parts, and of course the famous shoulder clasps. But they're all very nice, but they don't interest me as much as that. So there we are, 2 images of the ship, one looking from on the left in black and white, from the bow towards the stern. And this one on the right is really interesting. This excavation was one of the earliest excavations to feature coloured photography, and that was by 2 volunteers, 2 amateur photographers, female amateur photographers, who took about 800 images of the excavation. So yes, this on the right, they're just beginning to survey the ship. Whenever we build something, we need a plan to build to. Now, the Saxons did it in a very different way. They would have found the trees that were the right shape, or roughly the right shape, and they would have built the thing entirely by eye and by the experience of the shipwright, which is a tremendous feat on a vessel this long. But we're not trying to do that. We're trying to replicate what went into the ground. So, in some ways, we need a little bit more guidance as to how to do it. And also, the techniques, certainly in Britain, have, if not been lost, they're very rare nowadays. But 1939, so they were right up against the beginning of the war. They started the excavation in May or early June, and they actually finished with the plan of the ship a week before the Second World War broke out. And considering that, and considering the techniques of the day, they did a fantastic job. And this was one of the outputs from it. And it's one of the few outputs, along with those excavation photographs, that we actually have, because the gentleman who did the survey of the ship, Lieutenant Commander Hutchison, he died from natural causes during the war. His papers got burnt. The rest of the archive storage in the British Museum was bombed and was destroyed during the war. And we're left with those colour images and black and white images and this drawing, plus a few archaeological academic papers that were written in the period. This drawing is notable because at the ends here, I don't know if you can see this. There it is, it's there somewhere. Can you see? I don't know if you can see that red light, but at the ends of the ship there, it curves around in a sort of spoon shape. Same at the bow here. And that's not what we'd expect. if you've seen later Viking ships, you know they have a nice, fair, pointed ends. And this was at first just thought that this was the shape of the ship, but later on it was rectified by R.C. Anderson, and that's due to spreading in the ground. So they dug a trench, they put the ship in. By all accounts, it was a very accurate trench with only 3 or 4 inches of gap all around it. How they actually did that, I don't know. But yes, and then the very tops of the ends, so above here, would probably have been either above the natural ground level or even outside of the mound, and they would have either rotted off or been taken away possibly within 100 years or so. And that left that imprint in the ground. But what they were able to find by measuring the locations of the nails close to the frames at each station, there's 26 frames, and by measuring the shape, the plan of the rivets in 3 dimensions, they were able to get a very accurate image of the ship. And in 1965-67, Rupert Bruce Mitford, who was Keeper of Antiquities at the British Museum, led a second campaign to try and confirm the data that was there and find some more crucial evidence about the ship. Particularly, they were interested in looking at the keel. So running along the centre of the ship here, if I can hold this still enough, this narrow strip here, that's the keel, the backbone of the ship. And in 1939, they hadn't been able to find evidence of the cross-section of this keel. And that's key to actually the strength of the ship. But they did find a few more artifacts. They found bits of the helmet in the spoil heap, and I think they found a strap end as well. Didn't find very much. It'd obviously been a very, very comprehensive excavation. And they weren't able to find much more details about the keel, which is a bit of a problem for us, and perhaps come back to that in a minute. But this is the second drawing that was produced of the ship. And there was another one produced at the same time by the noted naval architect Colin Moody as well, which is slightly different to this. So we're beginning to build up a pattern of shapes that might be able to build a Saxon ship from. And all that data, when it was finally decided that the ship would be built, or actually Martin and Angela Evans and people like that in the 1980s were looking at building a reconstruction. The National Trust at Sutton Hoo even started fundraising to try and build a reconstruction, but it didn't get off the ground. And it was only really 2015, I think actually I heard about the plans for the building a bit earlier than that, around 2011. But it was really only 2015, something like that, that they actually sort of all coalesced, and there became a groundswell of a desire to rebuild this ship as the last artifact from the excavation that hadn't been reconstructed. So the data from those previous investigations were given to a team at Southampton University, and they used a modern 3D digital design program, Rhinoceros 3D. And these programs are fantastic. They're so versatile. And what they did was they put in all the rivet data that they had from that drawing, and from that they were able to extrapolate all the rest of the rivet data to the extent that when they drew the lines of planks in around those rivets, they were then able to see areas where perhaps one didn't fit properly, or where it was canted, or even quite a long area possibly where, well, one of two things could have happened. A few things could have happened there. It could have been recorded erroneously in 1939, but probably unlikely given what we know about it. It could have been an original build defect. Perhaps they had a narrow plank there, and so they had to put a little wiggle in the curve there to get the ship built. And so we could do all these, and so after 2 or 3 iterations of this process, they were able to get quite an accurate plan of the ship, the most accurate we believe there's been yet. And possibly the most important part of that exercise was where the lines of rivets went through the keel and joined the first row of planks, the garboard strakes, onto the keel. Now these are crucial because in a boat like this, where you build the shell first and then you put the frames inside it, the planking supports the keel. The keel doesn't support the planking. So here they're able to see that when they actually, in that top drawing, drew the straight keel as it had been drawn before, and overlaid that on the rivet lines, the two didn't match up. You can see how the line of the keel crosses the line of the rivets there. When they redrew it with more of a curved keel, then the lines of rivets follow the line of the keel. And that's crucial because most of the later Viking ships that have been reconstructed, they found that they actually had much more curvature to the keel in the side view than was originally thought. And having had the earlier drawings for Sutton Hoo with a straight keel, this showed that the keel actually virtually doesn't have any straight bits in it. It's a continuous curve from the forward end to the aft end. So that's very useful for a rowed ship because it helps it to turn more easily. Because if the keel is deeper at the ends, it produces more resistance to turning in the water. And it actually enables it to go on the beach much more easily. If it's shallower at the ends, you can get it further up the beach before it goes aground. And so you can get on and off it more quickly, more easily, should you need to. They're also able to interrogate the widths of the planking. So here we've got planks, and from the nail locations again, in red on the 1975 data, and blue from what they supposed it would be from their digital reconstruction in 2018. And you can see there's a key difference here. As we go up the ship, most of the two sets of nails overlay each other. But down here, particularly towards the keel, there's quite a significant difference. And in the excavation report from 1975, Bruce Roberts' 3-volume publication, they noted in that, Angela Evans noted in that for some reason, the strakes near the keel, the rows of planking near the keel, seem to be much narrower than the other ones. Whereas in 2008, she couldn't give a reason for that either. But there was some sort of hint that it might be to do with putting twist in the planks as they go in towards the end of the ship. It's very noticeable in this ship. In the middle of the ship, you can see there's perhaps, 10, 15 degrees of dead rise, as we call it, of angle to the horizontal. Whereas in the ends of the ship, they're almost vertical as they go into the stem and the stern post. We'll see that in a minute. But that led us to do some modelling, some physical modelling ourselves at 1/5 scale. And here we are. Here's the the full digital reconstruction. So that's basically the plans that I am supposed to be working to. It doesn't quite work like that because this isn't a yacht design, a naval architect's set of plans to build from. This is an archaeological drawing. It shows only what they could see from the original excavations. So we've got some doubts here. So at the left hand end there, the stern, you can see there's 3 frames very close together, whereas all the rest tend to be fairly evenly spaced along the ship. That's indicative in later ships of having a side rudder to steer with. So we're pretty sure that this ship had a side rudder, although there was no rudder found in the excavation, no means of suspending it. And so that's a big area that we as shipwrights then have to design and trial and work out from other ships. The tholes, these thorn-shaped pieces of timber on the top of the shear strake at the gunwale, they're marked in red here in the centre of the ship because they couldn't find those in the excavation. And yet they said these were 1-inch diameter, 6 or 7 inch long iron nails. And so why aren't they in the centre? That's the most logical, the most efficient place to row the ship from. And the arguments go that, well, they could have removed them to build the burial chamber, or perhaps that was the area where the king and his close retinue sat and they couldn't row there. And the more radical archaeologists and, should we say, sailors said, well, that's a perfect place to put a mast and where the rigging would attach. So perhaps this was a sailed ship, not just a rowed ship. And so all of these things we then have to take into account as we look at how we're going to build the ship. There's also another one up there. So around here, you see these 3 nails on the centre line here. That's where in this case, the stern post joins the keel. And that's drawn just as a square cut edge. And that's not particularly the right way to draw it. So there's a drawing error there. And then it's got this very narrow, straight keel because there's no evidence in the interior, in the centre part of the ship, the burial chamber area, in their enthusiasm to remove the grave goods. Bear in mind the time pressures they were under. A lot of that evidence in that part of the ship got trampled and damaged. And so we, as an archaeological drawing, this keel is based on the evidence they did have, which is in the ends of the ship, so around from frame 20 aft and from about frame 7 forwards. And so they chose to draw a straight line, a straight keel at the width that they knew. But straight away to the shipwrights, that looks like a keel that is too weak for this ship. Now we have to be careful when I say as a modern boat builder that's too narrow and too weak, I'm looking and comparing it to modern boat building. And it may well be that the Anglo-Saxons used something like that. But also it looked to some of the earlier archaeological reports as well that was a bit narrower than it might have been. And so we've had to look at areas like that also. And so to do that, we use contemporary things. This is on the right, this is the excavation of the Graveney boat on the Kent Marshes in 1971. So that's fairly concurrent with the second excavation, and in fact I think that is Angela Evans in the white jumper there, who actually was transferred from the second Sutton Hoo excavation to excavate the Graveney boat. So that's around 800 AD, something like that, a little bit later, could be as late as 900. And then here we've got the Gokstad ship, which is the earliest real completely known Viking ship. And so we can always, taking the stratagem that we work from the known archaeology before our ship, and we trust that more than the later archaeology because we don't know if the Saxons had access to that knowledge or skill. But we can use things like this as well to sort of work out exactly what might be the best way forwards. So once we've made our decisions, and these decisions on various details in the ship go on throughout the build. They've gone on throughout the build. We then take our drawing, which was, well, the first one I saw was 1/50th scale. And Jack, our project manager, said to me, can you build it from that? And I said, well, not really. So we've ended up with drawings at 1/10th scale, and we have a table of offsets, which tabulates all of these locations of the shape of the ship. And we draw those out at full size. So it's called lofting, because in more recent years it was always done in the loft floor of the boatyard. It was the only flat, empty space that they could do it. We did it on plywood boards, and so we lofted the ship we lofted the body of the ship, the body plan, to full size, and we also lofted it to 1/5th scale. We lofted the whole ship to 1/5th scale as a sort of means of just checking out these newfangled digital drawings. Don't trust those very much, so I thought we'd better do it properly. And so these are the moulds for the 1/5th scale model we built. And on the left there, you can see a full-size pattern for the stem of the ship. Now, those are full-size sheets of plywood, which, again, in my language, are 8 feet by 4 feet. So you can get an idea of the scale of that. That is a pattern that is about 20 feet long and curved. And so that is then introducing the modern techniques. As I've said, I don't think the Anglo-Saxons would have done it like that. They would have found a tree that looked like it might be a good shape for the stem or the stern post and built to that. But because we're trying to be faithful as we can to the ship that was in the ground, we need something a bit more than that. So we use these, those moulds to give us a shape to build to. And that is a 19th, 20th, 21st century technique. At the same time in the workshop, we will begin to learn some of the techniques. So on the left is Dr. Damien Goodburn, who for the last 30 years or so has been one of the most noted practitioners of ancient woodworking skills, built a lot of log boats and knows quite a bit about cleaving timber. So here we're just cleaving timber. The Saxons, for some reason we don't know, we've never found a large-scale Saxon period saw. We've found small saws, this sort of length, which we think were for carving the teeth in bone combs, but we've never found a big saw. And the only conclusion we can come to is that they were such good practitioners with axes, they just used axes. But it gives you, when you're trying to use axes, it gives you certain limitations and certain benefits in the way you convert the timber. So here we've got a radially cleaved section. So we've got the centre of the log, the pith line at the top, and we've got the bark on the outside of the log, and you can see it's like a wedge shape. We split the log in half, and then we split it into quarters, and then we split it into eighths, and then into sixteenths. And if it's a really big log, we should be able to split it into 30-seconds. But we've never managed to do that as yet. The most we've done is the log we cleaved last week, and we got 20 sections out of it. We may actually get 24 sections by the time we actually finish cleaving that log. But this is the sort of shape you end up with, this one here, when you've got a 16th of a log. And then we can take the axes, as if you go and see the folk outside, you'll see them demonstrating how we do it. Using different types of axes, we can then take the sections of log down to the 1-inch thickness, finished thickness of the planking. We know it's a 1-inch thickness because the nails that were recovered and that were x-rayed after the war, we know that between the head of the nail, the flat of the head of the nail, and the rove, the diamond-shaped washer that's on the outside of it, is 2 inches between the two. And because there's 2 pieces of planking there, it's very simple to know that it was 1 inch thick. The planking of this ship is just 1 inch thick, 25 millimetres. So we've got to take that down to there. And by our standards, there's quite a bit of waste there. But that wouldn't be waste to the Anglo-Saxons because they would use all of that for different processes. So larger sections they might use for burning into charcoal to use in forges, blacksmith's forges. Smaller sections they would heat with and cook with. They would use it for firing kilns to make pine tars with. They would use the whole. They would probably make fence posts and things like that as well. They would use the whole of the timber. We're actually our waste is actually being made into merchandising trinkets, which are on sale outside. Please buy generously. And the chippings actually go as paving in woodland paths. So we don't actually waste a lot, but we don't use it as productively as the Saxons would have done. So here you can see we've begun to set our models up. So that's the 1/5 scale model on the left, and you can see the moulds, the bulkheads, if you like, temporarily there. And we've got the keel in. Now, we decided fairly early on that, in conjunction with the guys at Southampton University who did the drawing, that that keel was too narrow and we would work more to the earlier 1975 drawing. So I have got the patterns out there today. So they drew a keel that was 8 inches wide, 200 millimetres wide, straight down the ship. But the early idea was that it could have been 11 inches wide and tapered along its length, or even as much as 14 inches wide. What's that, 350 mil? So we went for 11 inches, tapered to 18 inches. And we actually did get a modern naval architect involved. So that's the width. 11 inches, and in thickness it's about 4.5 inches. What's that, 110 mil, something like that, 120, 115 mil. And he did his calculations and came back and he said, if you want a keel to our modern standards that is strong enough for this ship, it needs to be 13 inches, 340 millimetres deep. So we said, well, thank you very much. It's good to know that, but we won't be doing that. So we have a keel that we think is pretty optimal to what would have been on the ship. And we continued, we planked that ship, and we'll come back to that later on, planked that model. And even at 1/5 scale, it's 5.5 metres, it's 18 feet long. It's quite a big model. And then we built as well, basically, a section of the burial chamber. This is the forward half, one half of the forward half of the burial chamber. And Mike, our volunteer here, he's giving a little lecture, a little tour to some local Sea Scouts. That is now planked, and we built the matching half to it as well. And this has been a training tool for the volunteers. So our project is volunteer-led. There's myself and the project manager, Jack, and I have two assistant shipwrights now. They're the only paid staff on the project. All the rest, there's over 100 volunteers now. And about 25 of them are boat builders, boat building volunteers. And so some of them a lot of them are retired. Some of them, quite a few, are retired engineers of various flavours. And some of them are sailors, some of them are rowers, but not many of them were boat builders. And so we needed to train them in the skills of boat building. And this is what this midships model, as we call it, has been used for. So while that's going on in the long shed in Woodbridge, where we are, just across the river from Sutton Hoo, I then have to go out and source some timber. Now, as a modern boat builder, I don't do that. I don't go into the forest. I go to the timber yard and get the nice planks and whatever sections I want. But here, we're trying to use fresh, green timber. This is the other thing. With using axes, you can't work an axe. You can't work a tree that's dry with an axe. The axe just bounces off. So we need trees that are freshly felled. Actually, if it's left in the log, like that long one which was for the keel, we can leave them up to 12, 15 months on the ground, and they will still have retained enough moisture for us to work them. This is in Swindon. This is quite interesting regarding how the Anglo-Saxons would have worked. I went to look at this tree that's lying on the ground here. This was the keel tree, and it is something like 11.8 metres, so 42 feet, from the sawn edge there at the ground to that knot just there. And it's dead straight, and there's not a knot in it anywhere. That was a beautiful tree, and we'd searched about a year to find that. And then I turned around and was just looking around the forest, and not 30 yards away is this tree with this huge, almost question mark-like shape in it. And that is exactly the shape of tree that we want for the curved timbers. So we actually had to cut that knot out in the end, so we shortened it. The keel's about 39 feet long. But to the ends of the waterline, where the stem and stern post attached, is 60 feet. So we have to put some extensions on the end of the keel. We'll see those in a minute. But this is where this tree comes in. The Anglo-Saxon shipwright would look at that tree and said, that looks about right for what I want. I'll have that one. And then he'll build his ship to that shape. And that's what I did here. I took a gamble and I said, I think that looks just about right. We'll get one piece out of this curve and we'll get another piece out of that curve. But we won't be able to use it above where that branch comes out because the grain will be all squirrely. So we took the two trees, we dragged them out of the forest. I went to view that one. I went to view them the week before the first COVID lockdown. And so we were just about to have them. No, I went to view them in February 2020. They were due to be felled the week before the first COVID lockdown. And so we had to wait 6 months before they could be felled. And we had to wait another more than 3 months until we could actually work on them. And this has been one of the big problems for the project, the delays such as that. And at that early stage of the project, I wasn't sure how well we would be able to, our volunteers would be able to convert this with axes, and it's such a valuable piece of timber. We took a decision to saw a section out of it for the keel. So that's over thick and over wide, and we just sawed it using a chainsaw mill. But then we also put the patterns on the as we call it, the question mark tree, and you can see how well those patterns actually line up with the shape of the tree. Now that was pure luck on my part, but it also shows you how the Saxon shipwrights would have worked. They would have known the type of timber that they would have wanted, and they would have been able to visualize it in their heads and go into the forest with a tree right and say, yes, that's the one. Or maybe the tree right, which was a job of equal status to the shipwright, managing the woodland, looking after the trees, even at that early time, would have been able to go to the shipwright and say, I think you want this one. And so it shows that can work. But generally, since then, we've always gone with patterns to the tree because, as I keep repeating, we are trying to build what went into the ground, not a generic ship. So we finally got through various lockdowns, and here is the long shed where we built. This is a purpose-built shed for us to work in. It was a derelict boatyard for about 20 years, and when it was redeveloped as apartments and shops and restaurants right on the seafront in Woodbridge, one of the things the developers had to do was to put in a public good, and they built us a community boat shed to the specific dimensions for the ship. And it's a bit of a long story, and I won't tell all of it, but I was part of the team that actually specified some of these dimensions. So if we can't actually get the ship out at the end of it, it is my fault. But I think we'll be all right. And here we've got various volunteers working on you can see the full-scale moulds for the cross-sections of the ship in the background in softwood. Here in the foreground, we've actually got the keel complete the right way up and on a strong back. So we know Damon Goodburn, who we saw earlier, excavated a Saxon slipway on the River Thames, and it consisted of posts driven into the silt on the foreshore with a notch cut in the top, and these all lined up, and the keel sat in it. Well, we're working on a concrete floor, so we can't quite do that. Can't drive things into the ground. So we used posts which are braced longitudinally and athwart ships and can't slide around. And then we put the keel on there. We put the extensions to the keel on there in a minute. And that way we can build the ship and it's secure. And then the idea is we just slide it out at the end of the build. And here you can see how guys converting some of the long timbers. This is actually the lower half of that sawn log you saw for the keel. And we did cleave that. We split that in half and got it into the long shed. And here they're doing some of the rough work. So we cut notches in the surface of the wedge of wood and then split out between those notches so that we have a roughly flat surface. And then using finer and finer axes, and again they're on display outside if you want to have a look, we can then bring it down to a really smooth, fine finish. And I've been very, very pleasantly surprised as to how smooth we can get. So this surface on the keel on the left here, this is all done with an axe. And this is upside down here. And it's not got the bevel angles for the planks put on it yet. It shouldn't be square like that. It's tapered. But this is all done with axes. And you can see, just as an aside, there's where that knot was in the log in the forest. You can see it there. And as it dried out, I thought we'll take a chance. But as it dried out, it dried and split too much. So we had to cut it off just beyond that. And then put, consequently, longer underlouts, extension pieces on each end of the keel. But then we got to the point where we could begin to put the moulds up. We were also beginning to look at making oars, the main power source, we believe, of the wood. So this is ash. Unfortunately, as you'll I expect you'll know, ash trees are afflicted with ash dieback disease, and a lot of the ash in the country is now damaged and dying. And fortunately, it's a benefit to us because we want long, straight ash. This actually isn't a very good example because you can see how there's a twist in the grain. So when we split it into half, we hope it's going to run straight and true, but this one didn't. It ran off to the side. And it's a live material. It does these things, and so every tree we cleaves differently. And some have been beautiful, dead straight. Others have cleaved and twisted through almost 90 degrees. And actually, I'm getting much better at understanding how to read these trees when they're standing in the forest, and so we're reducing the way that happens. But here you can see we've got quite a few of the moulds up on the keel, and we begin to look here at the curved timbers for the underlat. You can see the remains of the notches we've cut in and then taken the timber off, and you can get quite a flat surface on a very curved piece of timber, and that comes down even now. When you run your hand across some of these finished timbers, they almost feel like they've been planed. It really is a joy for someone like me to actually run my fingers over a piece of wood. And you can see here now we've begun to assemble the backbone. So this is the underlayout. It goes from around here somewhere. So it's just 3 wooden tree nails hold this piece of timber to the main keel. And that's why, as I said earlier, it actually is really important that the planking supports these and adds strength to the whole structure. And one of the things, again, I said about how we know that the rivet heads, the flat of the rivet head was parallel to the rove. And that means that actually in these, you can see how the twist is developing towards the end of the ship here. It means that the inside surface of the ends of the ship has to be hollowed out to maintain that parallel nail head and rove layout. So our volunteers here are hollowing out the inside of the underlayout, and that gets more and more difficult because it gets a much steeper taper as you go into the ends of the ship. And here you can see on the left, this is the stern post, so you've got the golden oak in the middle here. That's before the very top of it is hollowed out. It's just beginning to be hollowed out down at the left side of the picture there. And again, I don't know what the Saxons did about health and safety, but I know what I have to do. So we have to build a strong, safe platform that we can work from. And there you've got more of an overall view showing now all the moulds in place, and you really begin to get to feel the shape of the ship even before there's any planking on it. And all of that temporary structure is painted black so that, well, there's 2 reasons. It's much easier for us to explain to visitors, you know, that's, if it's painted black, it's just temporary, it won't be there in the ship. But also, when we work with photogrammetry and digital scanning of the ship to aid the recording and the measurement of it, it's much easier then for the people who are doing that to actually just remove anything that's black, and you end up with an image. Here's Alec, tame Saxon. He's not with us anymore, unfortunately. He's moved on, but he was a brilliant woodworker. That's the stem. So that's the very front, the prow of the ship. Again, a curved timber. So there we are. That's the final piece of the backbone, the stem being assembled. Again, we used, well, our multi-use model there. We used it to support the structure that we used to hoist the stem up with. I don't think the Saxons would have actually used anything very much different than that type of structure, except we don't know if they had pulleys, and they wouldn't have used a chain hoist, certainly. But they would have had some sort of structure where they could lift these heavy pieces of timber. Well, that's something like 14 feet off the ground, 4.5 meters off the ground. And the team that was involved in doing that, that was quite a good day, that was. This is the digital image. So you can see here, this is done by Southampton University. This is done by laser scanning. So they come and put their laser scanner at half a dozen sites around the building, and it scans the whole building and everything that's in it. And from that, you see there's sections here in black and red, because this is a combination of 2 scans. So the red is one scan, and the black is a second scan. So you can see, obviously the black would be the first, because that's where we were up to at that time, and the red is the later scan. And they can manipulate this eventually, when we get all the planking on the ship, to take the moulds out, and we can then get very clear understanding of how accurate a job we've done. So the actual drawing shows the distance over the ends of the ship to be 26.3 metres. And when they digitally scanned this, I said, can you tell me how long it is? Not thinking he would be able to. And he said, it's 26.1 metres. So we're within 200 millimetres over that 27 metre length. It's about 8 inches. So we didn't do too bad a job for amateurs. And then we can look at all sorts of other things there. We can look at, going back to that, those tolerances over that length, that's quite reasonable. When we're working on, say, much less than that, say 25 millimetres of a plank thickness, we can get much closer to that now. But all of that can be worked out from the laser scans. And then, as I said, it's a live material, and this is where the live material came and bit us. As we hollowed the stern underlayout, we cut into the pith line of the tree, so that's the very centre of the tree, without meaning to. And most pith lines run straight along the centre of a trunk. This one didn't. It went all over the show. And you can see there's a couple of knots in there as well, which weren't visible from the outside of the piece of timber before we started working on it. And so this was the beginning of last year. We had to take a decision with this. At this point here on the left, the split actually went right through the piece of timber, and you could move it about. And so we had to take a decision. What do we do here? So as a modern boat builder, I say, well, you wrap that out, you take that bit out, you glue in a couple of slivers here and a couple of bits there with some epoxy, and you're good to go in a couple of weeks, sort of thing. But our esteemed chairman decided we wouldn't do that. Actually, it wasn't just Martin. We all agreed that for the authenticity of the project, the way to do it was to take this out and replace it. Now, that piece of timber had taken, as I said, about 6 months, 9 months to source. It had taken 400 hours to convert it from the log. It's a 5 metre long piece of timber. And so we had to then go and find another tree that matched that shape. And yeah, we're not looking for any curve, we're looking for the same curve. And we didn't get anywhere in East Anglia. So Jack, this is the wonder of social media. Jack put a post out on social media, and within 2 days, I think it was, we'd had a response from the folk at the Woodland Trust at Hainault Ancient Forest in Essex. Well, I went all around. This is me going all around Suffolk looking for things. So there's one there on the left, which we will use as part of the tree, but there's not enough curve in that. The one in the centre, you can see there's a pattern. There's not enough curve in that. The one on the right, that's beautifully curved, except it dives away a bit at the top where Richard, our volunteer, is. And there was another one in the same place there that was perfect, except it was 4 inches short. And then another time we go to, so this is in West Suffolk. We go and look, and you can see all the numbers on these trees. These are commercially farmed oaks. This is a family business, and the family's been there since the 1600s, and this is their 3rd crop. And you can see all the numbers. There's 160 laid out on the ground. Not one of them was suitable. It's either the wrong curvature, or a knot in the wrong place, or didn't like the colour of it. Or, I don't know. No, I was looking for a very specific oak. But then we went down to Hainault, and this is a Woodland Trust. Woodland Trust are very good on their conservation, and they were actually restoring this bit of land, and you can see how there's a lot of green growth underneath the trees, and quite an open space. But these trees are still too close together for the long-term management of the woodland. And so you can see with the patterns on that, it's the same pattern on different trees. And they said, well, I said, there's 3 trees here that would do it. And they said, well, do you want all 3? Because we don't want them. And so we took all 3, and one of them we made into a new underlap. Interestingly, it took us longer to make the new one than it taken us to make the old one, because I put a group of people on it, whereas and they were still learning their skills, whereas previously Alec had done most of it himself, and he was good and professional and quick. So it took us an extra 50 hours to do the second one. This just shows the cleaving of the logs in detail. And you can see we've got, well, there's actually 2 metal wedges in there near the top, the dark pieces, one there and one there. But the rest are all seasoned, so these are dried wooden wedges. And we can take a natural split in the log after it's been felled and drive those wedges in, and that tends to open the split. And once you've got the split in the end open, it'll start to open up along the top as well. And then you could drive it in, and eventually, it took about 2.5 hours to get it split into 2 pieces. And by the end of the day, we got it into 1/2, 1/4, and 2/8. And you can see the difference here with the pith line. So it's the dark line running up the centre of the log compared to that one in the curved one. This one's dead true, where the other one just wasn't. That's about 5 metres long, that log. And we can then take that and make it into planks. And the way we make it into planks is, as I've said, using different types of axes. We'll take it down to 1 inch thick. And then we'll take our favourite patterns again. This time of the shape of the plank, the plan view of the plank. And we'll use the same technique. We'll cut notches in it. And we'll take the notches out, the timber out between the notches. And then using a draw knife. I think there is a draw knife out there. Just a hand tool that you pull along towards you. We can get that curve and that shape that we want for each individual plank. And then we can fit the planks. So this is early this year. And these clamps are very interesting. These actually, we have recovered some of these archaeologically in Britain, but they're much smaller than this. Are known to be from the Saxon period, but the smaller ones just aren't strong enough to hold these planks together. So we've actually gone to a slightly later Viking pattern. And all it is a bar across 2 pieces with a pin going through it and a wedge in the end. And as you drive the wedge in the one end, it clamps tighter in the other end. And they work very effectively to hold the pieces of timber together. But where we've got, scarves, so these are feather-edged scarves, the tree goes down to nothing, the plank goes down to nothing. Where we've got a feather-edged scarf, we actually need the finesse of the screw thread of a modern G-clamp. I don't know how the Saxons did it, but we still find that there is a use for mixing the technologies. But where we can, we are trying to use as many of the original technologies and tools as possible. So we've got original axes, we've got original spoon bits for drilling holes, and we've got the clamps as well. This is the 5th scale model, so here it is fully planked. Now another interesting bit in the archaeology is the shear strakes. So these paler, this is just plywood planking here. This is actually oak for the top strake. And the archaeology suggests again that due to the nail thicknesses, the bottom edge of that, where there's a row of nails, is 1 inch thick. But the tholes, the thorn-shaped pieces of timber along the top that the oars pull against, were known to be much thicker than that. So the top of the plank is 3 inches thick in full size. So some way it has to taper down. So here we've just put a straight bevel on it to experiment. But the drawings from the earlier excavations show a scalloped shape, which we can do if we want to. We also know that it goes down to 1 inch thickness all the way along, where it runs into the stem. So somewhere there's a transition from 3 inches down to 1 inch. And so we've been able to actually use this model to help us work those issues out. It's been a very useful model. There we go. So you've got the thole at the top. Here's the 3 inch width thickness of the plank. tapering down to 1 inch, like the rest of the planking. And here you can see where we've done it. Well, actually, this is the midships model before we put that plank on, in this case. And you've got the bevel on the back. Each plank is beveled at the top, and that's done with a draw knife. And also here we've begun to put the proper frames in. So here you've got one of our softwood moulds, but here you've got the proper oak frames in. So these were built shell first. They built the shell of the ship, and then they put the frames in afterwards, or a combination of the two actually. But they built the ship, then they started to put the bottom framing in, put the rest of the planking on, and put the top framing in. And we know that from the Mediterranean right through to Northern Europe, and we know that the time at which that change happened from shell first like this to skeleton first, where you put all the backbone in and all the frames in, and then you put the planks on really just to keep the water out. That happened later in time, the further north that you go. And we don't know exactly when that was. But this is all part of the archaeology of it. Here's our old underlaut, our new underlaut, having been sawn, and in the workshop, having the face put on it. Again, it's a live piece of timber, and it was only after we were cutting the third face on it that we found there was a defect in it. So it's up there. There's a branch growing out of it in the centre, which we couldn't see from the outside. It had grown, the bark had grown around it and healed it completely. But we were able to count the rings on this little branch. It was 20 years old, and it had either been broken off accidentally or deliberately by a tree right, and the tree had grown around it. But you can see there, that dark stain, that was all that was left of it in the end, and we still managed to use that. This has been entirely worked with axes, and you can see the sort of finish that we get on it. There it is, completely finished, with a 3-foot scarf on it, cut with an axe, and finished with a draw knife. And you've got the beveled edges here for the planking to sit on. And there we are, having moved the stern post out to slide the old one out, slide the new one in, and here the guys are putting the tree nails in again fixed with just 3 tree nails. And you can see how deep the trench almost is in the centre of the stern post here. This is Sam. He's a cameraman who works for Time Team. I don't know if most people have seen Time Team, but Time Team is back, Time Team Digital, and they're doing digs again, and they're following our progress, hopefully to produce a programme later on regarding it. And here now, no guesses for when that was taken. This is the ship, the fifth scale model turned over, ready to have the framing put in it. I don't know if you can see this garboard strake, this short stroke, this first stroke here, is much narrower than this one. And this is the contrast between the Southampton plans and the earlier 1975 plans and 39 plans. And it turned out that the reason that it was much easier to twist this plank when it went in, even though it was only 5mm thick. It's much easier to twist it with a narrow plank than a wider plank. And so it seems like the original proposal by Angela Evans was correct. And so rather than actually plank to the 2018 plans, we've actually planked to in the full-size ship to the 1975 plans. I'm going to have to hurry along here. We still get timber delivered. This is four logs that were felled, again, as part of their conservancy programme by the National Trust at Blickling Hall in Norfolk. And I went to view these 3 times, I think, before we settled on the right ones. And we've also got on the right here some Scots pine. Ash and oak for oars is very heavy. Softwood would be about half the weight. And so the National Trust at Sutton Hoo donated us some of their Douglas fir that they were thinning, for us to experiment with oars. And so we're still doing that experiment at the moment. But we've got to build probably 60 oars for the ship, 40 and a few spares. And then as we came to the beginning of this year, we finally began to put planking on the ship. And this is really quite interesting because you can see some of the trenches in this plank, which wasn't done quite as well as some of the others, whereas this one is really smooth. And so volunteers are learning all the time, and some of them have a greater aptitude for different types of work than others. And so that's the way we're doing it. We are a volunteer-led organisation, as I've said. We're pretty much funded by people sponsoring us. We have one or two donors, but we are funding it by... So each rivet, there's 3,500 rivets that attach the planking, and each one of those has been sponsored by a member of the public. And then people are sponsoring planks, people are sponsoring oars, people are buying merchandise that we're turning and things like that. So we actually have a donation box there, should you feel moved later on. Strange, that, isn't it? But anyway, that's how we're doing it. The aim is that we finish planking the ship this year. We fit the interior out next year. We launch in spring 2025. And we learn to row it during 2025. And then there's 3 seasons of campaigns to look at where this ship might have gone in the period. And I think Martin's going to talk about that this afternoon, which you're welcome to attend if you can. But for now, apart from any questions, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm sure you share some of the joy of observing a master craftsman at work. I mean, it is an extraordinary combination of meticulous measurement, fine carpentry, and a sort of love affair with oak. I'm sure many of you who potter about and try and mend things also get excited about wood. It's such a fantastic material. And to think of this ship, as big as it is, measured outside, like 90 feet long, it's going to be terrific. However, are you happy to take some questions?
I am indeed, yes.
So just fire away, and if you wave an arm.
Thank you. Just a quick one. You've referred a number of times to tree nails.
Yes.
Is that basically a dowel?
It is a dowel. It's a headed dowel, yes. So there are, is it 1 or is it 3 imprints of dowels in the archaeology of the Sutton Hoo ship? We know that they were 1 inch diameter. They seem to like an inch, the Saxons, as a unit of measurement. Funnily enough, I've got big thumbs, but that is just about an inch from the tip of your thumb to the first knuckle. And it might be that it was as simple as that was a unit of measurement. Also, the nail spacings, this is an aside, the nail spacings in the hull are just a hand's breadth apart. And so it's just very simple. There's a nail, I'll put my hand down, I'll put another nail next to it. There's obviously a lot more gone into that decision-making process, and we don't know what that was, but do know that that is about what it is. So for the tree nails, the planks of the ship are held together with iron nails. The frames that go into the ship are held with wooden tree nails. And as you say, it is a dowel, but it has a head. It has a swollen head with a domed top to it. And on the other end, it has a notch cut into it and a wedge knocked in to secure it. And we've got some samples of those outside if you want to have a look. One of the key things with that is that you need a dissimilar material for the tree nail and the wedge. If we tried, so in the backbone we've used oak tree nails for strength, but when we try to drive an oak wedge into it, the oils in the 2 similar timbers just mean that the wedge bounces out. So we had to use a different type of wood for the wedge, and in that case we used a willow wedge. Whereas for the for the frames, we've used willow tree nails with oak planks. The benefit of willow is it swells so much, so we dry it out, make our tree nail, put it in the hole, and then when it goes in the water, the willow takes up so much water that it swells any defects in the hole and stops any leaks.
Just imagine that putting a piece of wood to fasten into the keel is stronger than putting a piece of iron. It takes a bit of getting used to, but they knew what they were doing, those guys. Any other questions? Please.
You spoke about the possibility that it was a sailed ship.
Yes.
Sailed. Are you planning on putting any masts?
We are. There was in the 1990s, a chap called Edwin Gifford built a half-length version to see if, well, both of Sutton Hoo and of Graveney, which showed on there early, to see if it was possible that they could have sailed. Now, it's always been argued that these ships couldn't have sailed effectively because they have no keel projecting below the hull. Gifford didn't like this idea, and so he built one at half scale with initially the same projection, which is about 1.5 inches as on the Sutton Hoo ship. So he did it to 3/4 of an inch. And then he gradually added sections to see what effect it would have. And eventually he found that he could take these additions off, and it didn't really make much difference to how the ship sailed. And the ship sails very effectively downwind and across wind, and it can just sail a little bit towards the wind as well. But he was roundly criticised in the archaeological press because he'd used a half-length ship. Technically, it's actually 1/8 of the size, with full-size people. So when you put full-size people in, you've got movable ballast, and you've got different scales working together, and it's not really sound. So the only way we will show if it definitely could have sailed, not that it would have sailed, that it could have sailed, is to try it at full size. And so we will try it at full size, but not to the detriment of the rowing trials.
The thing is that it's always a battle with experimental archaeology between perceived authenticity on the one hand and letting the experiment sort of give it its head in another way. And I was very keen to make sure we followed all the evidence closely with this build, and stayed anti-sail for rather longer than I should have done, I think, really. But a lot of people, particularly people who sailed a lot, felt that it was necessary to tell me we needed to sail on. But from my own researches about where we're taking the ship, it didn't take long to realize that without a sail, you couldn't make many of the voyages that we wanted to make. And then I got finally convinced by finding a line in Willibald's trip in the Mediterranean, which I'll tell you about this afternoon if you come, where it's absolutely unmistakable, because whatever language it is, whether it's Latin or anything else, when he describes the belly of the sail filling and us proceeding on our voyage, there's no mistaking what that is. You know, it's not a large handkerchief or something. You know, it's definitely a sail. And so it does seem to me that's only, 50, 70 years later, and they definitely sailed then. And as you piece everything together, you come up with these arguments which are, in archaeological terms, are just convergent. You can't say, oh, it definitely did or definitely didn't, but you have so much convergence. And I think that Tim has always argued for a sail. I think we've got some idea of the rigging, but you know that's still to do. So it's a wonderful way of doing archaeology. It doesn't make it up as you go along. Well, okay, not really anyway. And but it is definitely testing, thinking testing, hypothesis testing. And that way you can go quite a long way into the unknown. Any other questions? Yes, please.
What concerns do you have about the iron nails reacting with the oak over time?
There are concerns. I mean, the great benchmark that we have is the Viking Ship Museum at Roskilde in Denmark, and they've been building reconstructions of Viking ships for the last 40 years, 30 years. And they have found, by experiment, that the iron, it's fairly obvious really, the iron corrodes, it rusts, particularly in salt water, and then the tannins, the acids in the oak, they also work to exacerbate the problem. So before Martin came along as chair, we were actually going to use copper to increase the longevity of the ship. But again, for the archaeological authenticity, to find out exactly what rate this will work at, because some of those earlier reconstructions have only been used in brackish water, not fully salt water. and where we are is definitely salt water. So it's correct again that we use iron nails, and so they would have used bog iron, which they collected from marshy ground. We're using wrought iron, which is the closest we can really commercially get to that. So yeah, we are using iron, and we have considered why we should and shouldn't as well.
Question? Yeah, in the middle there.
On the images you projected on here, you had one benchmark boat as a reference for a certain Hoo shape. I've been to Roskilde and I've seen the references there and all the different designs. If they can benchmark all the models or the real life size, you can say. Do we actually have many Anglo-Saxon or period Northern European benchmarks to work against? I was thinking of how is the sail mast fitted, the structure, or anything else. Otherwise, it is genuine experimental.
Yeah. We have one ship that is earlier than ours, which is the Newdam oak boat. That was deposited in a bog in southern Denmark around 300 AD. It was put in the bog whole, actually with 3 ships in there, and it was put in there with lots of swords, so it's thought it was a votive offering as a war booty, basically. And so that is definitely a Rhodes ship. It was excavated whole. It's been on exhibition for 160 years nearly. And it has been reconstructed as well, twice. And so that is really the reference ship that we have, the earlier ship. Then there are, in Britain, there's Sutton Hoo, there's Snape, which is a cemetery less than 10 miles north of Sutton Hoo. We think it's part of the same community. There was a ship there, but that was excavated again in the 1860s by antiquarians, and they weren't as diligent in recording it, and there weren't things like photographic techniques, well, very early, but they certainly weren't used. So we have one rough drawing of a nail pattern, not enough to work from. Then there's 2 smaller ones in East Anglia again. Again, excavated very early, and we don't have a reasonable understanding of what shape they were really. And then there's the Graveney boat from getting towards 900 AD. And that is known to have been a sailed ship. And it's only half the length of Sutton Hoo. But those 5 plus Newdam, really, they're the only ones from what we would term the Saxon period. So we have to be careful what we do. Yeah.
But you can throw the net wider. I mean, there's been some brilliant maritime archaeologists, such as my great departed friend, Early Crumlin Pedersen, who founded the museum at Roskilde. And, you know, they speak boat language, so they can move all around the Mediterranean. People are people everywhere you go, that they always have similar challenges when it comes to putting a boat on the water. So, yes, it's true, but the fact that people are worried about us taking shortcuts or cheating in some way, that's good, because that presents a challenge. Everything is done scientifically. There's a hypothesis, there's a test, there's recorded results, there's then a decision. Is this valid? So one has to go slowly through all those stages, and then we hope to build confidence that what we're doing is absolutely valid. Sorry, I beg your pardon, go on.
Along the lines you talk about expanding it further for guidance in terms of structures.
Yeah.
Since referring to the buckles, etc., that were in the grave, they were, I understand, possibly made by the same, I'm going to call them jewellers, that were in Uppsala, because there's a very close design that has a signature to it. As I understand the so obviously there was a transmission through trade and maybe even the ancestral line. And I was thinking, of course, the ideas of construction must have moved backwards.
Yeah, but they're very different types of ships. In the Mediterranean, they tend to be carvo built, so the planks are laid side by side, whereas these northwestern European ones are clinker built. The planks overlap.
And I was thinking up and down from Scandinavia to the UK. Obviously, we had the migration routes.
Yes.
But obviously the skill sets
yes.
have moved with them as well.
Yeah, so we can take information and ideas from the Viking period, certainly, and we've tested some of them out at model scale. We've not incorporated any as yet. The big issue will come in fitting out the inside of the ship. Because it was a sand impression, there was no evidence for the inside of the ship at all. So we're having to work backwards and use later technology and stuff from Newdam as well to look at how we do that.
There's going to be a few more interconnections this afternoon if you're able to come. There's one more question. Could I take yours, please?
How do you cope with working with green wood? Are you just going to make an awful lot of spare planks? Or?
No, actually, the level of accuracy that some of our guys and girls, women as well, we have 2 or 3 female volunteers, that they can get to is really quite high. If you just stop outside on your way if you can, and the piece of wood that we've got there, you can actually feel how smooth the surface is. So it's not so much quality control and quality management, it's actually the widths and the shapes of the specific planks which is the limitation. So we have a stack of about 10 finished planks at the moment, which are just waiting for the right shape when we get higher up in the ship to go in. So the key there is to keep them damp and moist until we can put them into the ship.
We have to stop now, and just to say thank you very much for coming, and do drop into our stall. And I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I think Tim Kirk is a brilliant shipwright. We're very lucky to have him. Let's give him a round of applause.